All right, so now we come into the Captain Hardin era of Project Blue Book, which was short-lived, as was with most of the following people after Ruppelt. In March of 1954, Captain Charles Hardin took over Blue Book. However, during this time, the 4602nd conducted most UFO investigations, and Hardin was totally okay with that. Ruppelt wrote that Hardin, and I quote, thinks that anyone who is even interested, referring to UFOs, is crazy. They bore him. In 1955, the Air Force decided that the goal of Project Blue Book should not be to investigate UFO reports, but to minimize the number of unidentified UFO reports. By late 1956, the number of unidentified sightings had dropped from the 20 to 25% of the Ruppelt era to less than 1%. Fast forward to 1956, Captain George T. Gregory takes over as Blue Book's director. Clark writes that Gregory led Blue Book in an even firmer anti-UFO direction than the apathetic Hardin. The 4602nd was dissolved, and the 1066th Air Intelligence Service Squadron was charged with UFO investigations. There was actually little or no investigation of UFO reports. A revised AFR 20-2 issued during Gregory's time as director emphasized that unexplained UFO reports must be reduced to a minimum. One way that Gregory reduced the number of unexplained UFOs was by simple reclassification. Possible cases became probable, and probable cases were upgraded to certainties. By this logic, a possible comet became a probable comet, while a probable comet was flatly declared to have been a misidentified comet. Similarly, if a witness reported an observation of an unusual balloon-like object, Blue Book usually classified it as a balloon, with no research and qualification. These procedures became standard for most of Blue Book's later investigation. All right, so that was Captain Gregory takes over in 56. 1958, Lieutenant Colonel Robert J. Friend was appointed the head of Blue Book. Friend made some attempts to reverse the direction Blue Book had taken since 1954. Clark writes that, and I quote, Friend's efforts to upgrade the files and catalog sightings according to various observed statistics were frustrated by a lack of funding and assistance. Heartened by Friend's efforts, Hynek organized the first of several meetings between Blue Book staffers and ATIC personnel in 1959. Hynek's plans came to naught. During Friend's time at Blue Book, ATIC contemplated passing the oversight to another Air Force agency, but neither the Air Research and Development Center nor the Office of Information for the Security of the Air Force was interested. In 1960, there were U.S. congressional hearings regarding UFOs. Civilian UFO Research Group, NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, had publicly charged Blue Book with covering up UFO evidence and had also acquired a few allies in the U.S. Congress. Blue Book was investigated by the Congress and the CIA, with critics, most notably the civilian UFO group NICAP, asserting that Blue Book was lacking as a scientific study. In response, ATIC added personnel, increasing the total personnel to 3 military personnel plus civilian secretaries, and increased Blue Book's budget. It seemed to mollify some of Blue Book's critics, but it was only temporary. A few years later, the criticism would be even louder. By the time Friend was transferred from Blue Book in 1963, he thought that Blue Book was effectively useless, not to be dissolved, even if it caused an outcry amongst the public. Major Quintanilla. On August of 1963, Major Hector Quintanilla steps in as the new lead. Once again, another hater. He largely continued the debunking efforts, and it was under his direction that Blue Book received some of its sharpest criticism. UFO researcher Jerome Clark goes as far as to write that, by this time, Blue Book had lost all credibility. Physicist and UFO researcher Dr. James E. McDonald once flatly declared that Quintanilla was not competent from either a scientific or an investigative perspective, although he also stressed that Quintanilla shouldn't be held accountable for it, as he was chosen for his position by a superior officer and was following orders in directing Blue Book. Blue Book's explanations of UFO reports were not universally accepted, however, and critics, including some scientists, suggest that Project Blue Book performed questionable research, or worse, was perpetrating cover-up. This criticism grew especially strong and widespread in the 1960s. Take, for example, the many mostly nighttime UFO reports from the Midwestern and Southeastern United States in the summer of 1965. Witnesses in Texas reported multicolored lights and large aerial objects shaped like eggs or diamonds. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol reported that Tinker Air Force Base, near Oklahoma City, had tracked up to 4 UFOs simultaneously, and that several of them had descended very rapidly, from about 22,000 feet to about 4,000 feet in just a few seconds. An action well beyond the capabilities of conventional aircraft of the era. John Shockley, a meteorologist from Wichita, Kansas, reported that using the State Weather Bureau radar, he tracked a number of odd aerial objects flying at altitudes between about 6,000 and 9,000 feet. These and other reports received wide publicity. Project Blue Book officially determined the witnesses had mistaken Jupiter or bright stars, such as Regal or Betelgeuse, gotta look it up. Project Blue Book officially determined the witnesses had mistaken Jupiter or bright stars such as Regal or Betelgeuse for something else. Alright, so I'm not sure. I had to look it up because it's Betelgeuse. According to YouTube, it's Betelgeuse. Betelgeuse. There's always the Frenchman that helps me understand how to say words in English. For some reason, his page is always the first one that pops up. But either way, Regal and Betelgeuse are... Regal? I think it's Regal. R-I-G-E-L. Regal or Rigel. Either way, Regal or Rigel is the brightest star in the constellation of Orion, and Betelgeuse is the second brightest star. So Project Blue Book was saying that they had mistaken what they saw for Jupiter or one of these bright stars. Blue Book's explanation was widely criticized as inaccurate. Robert Reiser, director of the Oklahoma Science and Art Foundation Planetarium, offered a strongly worded rebuke of Project Blue Book that was widely circulated. This is quoting him, that is as far from the truth as you can get. These stars and planets are on the opposite side of the Earth from Oklahoma City at this time of year. The Air Force must have had its star finder upside down during August. Another case that Blue Book's critics seized upon was the so-called Portage County UFO chase, which began at about 5 a.m. near Ravenna, Ohio on April 17, 1966. Police officers Dale Spar and Wilbur Neff spotted what they described as a disc-shaped silvery object with a bright light emanating from its underside at about 1,000 feet in altitude. They began following the object, which they reported sometimes descended as low as 50 feet. The police from several other jurisdictions were involved in the pursuit. The chase ended about 30 minutes later near Freedom, Pennsylvania, some 85 miles away. The UFO chase made national news, and the police submitted detailed reports to Blue Book. 5 days later, following brief interviews with only one of the police officers, but none of the other ground witnesses, Blue Book's director, Major Hector Quintanilla, announced their conclusions. The police, one of them an Air Force gunner during the Korean War, had first chased a communications satellite, then the planet Venus. This conclusion was widely derided, and police officers strenuously rejected it. In his dissenting conclusion, Hynek described Blue Book's conclusion as absurd. In the report, several of the police had unknowingly described the moon, Venus, and the UFO, though they unknowingly described Venus as a bright star very near to the moon. Ohio Congressman William Stanton said that the Air Force has suffered a great loss of prestige in the community. Once people entrusted with the public welfare no longer think the people can handle the truth, then the people, in return, will no longer trust the government. In September of 1968, Hynek received a letter from Colonel Raymond Sleeper of the Foreign Technology Division. Sleeper noted that Hynek had publicly accused Blue Book of shoddy science and further asked Hynek to offer advice on how Blue Book could improve its scientific methods. Hynek was to later declare that the Sleeper's letter was the first time in my 20-year association with the Air Force as scientific consultant that I had been officially asked for criticism and advice regarding the UFO problem. Hynek wrote a detailed response dated October 7, 1968, suggesting several areas where Blue Book could improve. In part, he wrote, 1. Neither of the two missions of Blue Book, determining if UFOs are a threat to national security and using scientific data gathered by Blue Book, are being adequately executed. Number 2. The staff of Blue Book, both in numbers and in scientific training, is grossly inadequate. 3. Blue Book suffers in that it is a closed system. There is virtually no scientific dialogue between Blue Book and the outside scientific world. 4. The statistical methods employed by Blue Book are nothing less than a travesty. 5. There's been a lack of attention to significant UFO cases and too much time spent on routine cases and on peripheral public relations tasks. Concentration could be on 2 or 3 potentially scientific significant cases per month, instead of being spread thin over 40 to 70 cases per month. The information input to Blue Book is grossly inadequate. An impossible load is placed on Blue Book by the almost consistent failure of UFO officers at local air bases to transmit adequate information. 7. The basic attitude and approach within Blue Book is illogical and unscientific. 8. Inadequate use had been made of the project's scientific consultant, Hynek himself. Only cases that the project monitor deems worthwhile are brought to his attention. His scope of operation has been consistently thwarted. He often learns of interesting cases only a month or 2 after the receipt of the report at Blue Book. Despite Sleeper's request for criticism, none of Hynek's commentary resulted in any substantial change in Blue Book. Quintanilla's own perspective on the project is documented in his manuscript, UFOs, an Air Force Dilemma. Lieutenant Colonel Quintanilla wrote the manuscript in 1975, but it was not published until after his death in 1998. Quintanilla states in the text that he personally believes it's arrogant to think human beings were the only intelligent life in the universe. Yet, while he found it highly likely that intelligent life existed beyond Earth, he had no hard evidence of any extraterrestrial visitation. So in 1966, we come up with a need for a congressional hearing. A string of UFO sightings in Massachusetts and New Hampshire provoked a congressional hearing by the House Committee on Armed Services. According to attachments to the hearing, the Air Force had at first stated that the sightings were the result of a training exercise happening in the area. But NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, reported that there was no record of a plane flying at the time the sightings occurred. Another report alleged that the UFO was actually a flying billboard advertising gasoline. Raymond Fowler of NICAP added his own interviews with the locals who saw Air Force officers confiscating newspapers with the story of UFOs and telling them not to report what they had seen. 2 police officers who had witnessed the UFOs, Eugene Bertrand and David Hunt, wrote a letter to Major Quintanilla stating that they felt their reputations were destroyed by the Air Force. It was impossible to mistake what we saw for any kind of military operation, regardless of altitude. The irritated officers wrote, adding that there was no way it could have been a balloon or helicopter. According to Secretary Harold Brown of the Air Force, Blue Book consisted of 3 steps: investigation, analysis, and the distribution of information gathered to interested parties. After Brown gave permission, the press were invited into the hearing. By the time of the hearing, Blue Book had identified and explained 95% of the reported UFO sightings. None of these were extraterrestrial or a threat to national security. Brown himself proclaimed, "I know of no one of scientific standing or executive standing with a detailed knowledge of this in our organization who believes that they came from an extraterrestrial source." Dr. J. Allen Hynek, scientist consultant to Blue Book, suggests in walks Dr. Hynek, a science consultant to Blue Book. Hynek suggested in an unedited statement that a civilian panel of physical and social scientists be formed for the express purpose of determining whether a major problem really exists in regards to UFOs. Hynek remarked that he has not seen any evidence to confirm extraterrestrials, nor do I know any competent scientist who has or who believes that any kind of extraterrestrial intelligence is involved. So this brings us to the Condon Committee. Criticism Blue Book continued to grow through the mid-1960s. NICAP's membership ballooned to about 15,000, and the group charged the U.S. government with a cover-up of UFO evidence. Following U.S. congressional hearings, the Condon Committee was established in 1966 as a neutral scientific research body. However, the committee became mired in controversy, with some members charging Director Edward U. Condon with bias, and critics would question the validity of the scientific rigor of the Condon Report. In the end, the Condon Committee suggested that there was nothing extraordinary about UFOs, and while it left a minority of cases unexplained, the report also argued that further research would not be likely to yield significant results. In response to the Condon Committee's conclusions, Secretary of the Air Force Robert C. Siemens, Jr. announced that Blue Book would soon be closed because further funding cannot be justified either on the grounds of national security or in the interest of science. The last publicly acknowledged day of Blue Book operations was December 17, 1969. However, researcher Brad Sparks, citing research from the May 1970 issue of NICAP's UFO Investigator, reports that the last day of Blue Book activity was actually January 30th, 1970. According to Sparks, Air Force officials wanted to keep the Air Force's reaction to the UFO problem from overlapping into a fourth decade, and thus altered the date of Blue Book's closure in official files. Blue Book's files were sent to the Air Force Archives at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. Major David Shea was to later claim that Maxwell was chosen because it was accessible yet not too inviting. Ultimately, Project Blue Book stated that UFO sightings were generated as a result. A mild form of mass hysteria. Individuals who fabricate such reports to perpetuate and we've been over this. Ultimately, Project Blue Book stated the following UFO sightings were generated as a result of what we've already gone over, but for a little refresher, a mild form of mass hysteria, individuals who fabricate such reports to perpetuate a hoax or seek publicity, psychopathological persons, and misidentification of various conventional objects. In 2003, the USAF publicly indicated that there were no immediate plans to reestablish any official government UFO study programs. However, in December 2017, it was disclosed that a new secret UFO study titled the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP, was funded at $22 million from 2007 to 2012. USAF official statement on UFOs, as noted in the USAF fact sheet 95-03. From 1947 to 1969, the Air Force investigated unidentified flying objects under Project Blue Book. 2. There has been no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represent technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. 3. There has been no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified are extraterrestrial vehicles. I suppose that's fair. Let's look it up. Let's define extraterrestrial. Outside of Earth or its atmosphere. Interesting. With the termination of Project Blue Book, the Air Force regulation establishing and controlling the program for investigating and analyzing UFOs was rescinded. Documentation regarding the former Blue Book investigation was permanently transferred to the modern military branch, National Archives, and Records Service, and is available for public review and analysis. Since the termination of Project Blue Book, nothing has occurred that would support a resumption of UFO investigations by the Air Force. There are a number of universities and professional scientific organizations that have considered UFO phenomena during periodic meetings and seminars. A list of private organizations interested in aerial phenomena may be found in Encyclopedia of Associations, published by Gale Research. Interest in and timely review of UFO reports by private groups ensure that the sound evidence is not overlooked by the scientific community. Persons wishing to report UFO sightings should be advised to contact local enforcement agencies. I don't know about you, but here in Portland, we don't have a UFO division of our police department. We barely have a police department. That is one nice thing about living in Portland. There's almost no police on the road most of the time. All right, so Project Blue Book Special Report number 14. In late December of 1951, Ruppelt met with members of the Battelle Memorial Institute, a think tank based in Columbus, Ohio. Ruppelt wanted their experts to assist them in making the Air Force UFO study more scientific. It was the Battelle Institute that devised the standardized reporting form. Starting in late March 1952, the Institute started analyzing existing sighting reports and encoding about 30 report characteristics onto IBM punched cards for computer analysis. Project Blue Book Special Report number 14 was their massive statistical analysis of Blue Book cases to date, some 3,200, by the time the report was completed in 1954. After Ruppelt had left Blue Book. Even today, it represents the largest such study ever undertaken. Battelle employed 4 scientific analysts who sought to divide cases into knowns, unknowns, and a third category of insufficient information. They also broke down knowns and unknowns into 4 categories of quality from excellent to poor. Cases deemed excellent might typically involve experienced witnesses such as airline pilots or trained military personnel, multiple witnesses corroborating evidence such as radar, contact, or photographs, etc. In order for a case to be deemed known, only 2 analysts had to independently agree on a solution. However, for a case to be called an unknown, all 4 analysts had to agree. Thus, the criterion for an unknown was quite stringent. In addition, sightings were broken down into 6 different characteristics: color, number, duration of observation, brightness, shape, and speed. And then these characteristics were compared between knowns and unknowns to see if there was a statistically significant difference. The main results of the statistical analysis were about 69% of the cases were judged known or identified, 38% were considered conclusively identified, while 31% were still doubtfully explained. About 9% fell into sufficient information. About 22% were deemed unknown, down from the earlier 28% valued of the Air Force studies. In the known category, 86% of the knowns were aircraft, balloons, or had astronomical explanations. Only 1.5% of all cases were judged to be psychological or crackpot cases. A miscellaneous category comprised 8% of all cases and included possible hoaxes. The higher the quality of the case, the more likely it was to be classified unknown. 35% of the excellent cases were deemed unknowns, as opposed to only 18% of the poorest cases. All right. Some of the areas that we find Project Blue Book in fiction would be Project UFO. Project Blue Book was the inspiration for the 1978 to 1979 TV show Project UFO, which was known as Project Blue Book in some countries, which is supposedly based on Project Blue Book cases. However, the show frequently went against the actual project conclusion. The show deemed that aliens persisted to live on Earth and live coherent lives among Homo sapiens. And Twin Peaks. Project Blue Book played a major role in the 2nd season of the TV series Twin Peaks. Galactica 1980. Every episode of the original Battlestar Galactica spin-off series Galactica 1980 ended with a short statement about the U.S. Air Force's 1969 Project Blue Book findings that UFOs are not proven to exist and are not a threat to national security. Project Blue Book, original title. From 2019, Project Blue Book is the inspiration for the drama series Project Blue Book, which began airing on the History Channel in January of 2019. So in conclusion, textual records of Project Blue Book, the documentation relating to investigations of unidentified flying objects, excluding names of people involved in sightings, are now available for research in the National Archives building. The record includes approximately 2 cubic feet of unarranged project or administrative files, 37 cubic feet of case files in which individual sightings are arranged chronologically, and 3 cubic feet of records relating to the Office of Special Investigations, the OSI, portions of which are arranged chronologically by OSI district and by Overseas Command. A cubic foot of records comprises about 2,000 pages. Finding aids for these records include a file list for the project files and an index to individual sightings entered by date and location. Access to Blue Book textual records is by means of 94 rolls of 35mm microfilm T1206 in the National Archives microfilm reading room. The first microfilm roll includes a list of contents for all the rolls and the finding aids. Photographs scattered among the textual records have also been filmed separately on the last 2 rolls. Motion picture film, sound recordings, and some still pictures are maintained by the Motion Picture and Sound and Video Branch, NNSM, and the Still Picture Branch, NNSP. And that's it. That is the end of our episode. Probably going to be episodes, looking back at the timeline here, episodes on Project Blue Book, Project Grudge, and Project Sign. Yeah, like I said, this was one that there was just a ton of information. It was hard for me to keep it, it was hard for me to retain all of it. Like, there was just so much done, so many different people that ran the organization, so many reports done by them. Yeah, this was a lot. I won't lie, a lot of it was just copy and paste articles and read it, because, like I said, I'd been doing this, I'd started the Project Blue Book in its own Word file, like all the information for reading and stuff, and ended up doing Roswell, the Kenneth Arnold thing, and everything else. And honestly, the Project Blue Book itself, not even Sign and Grudge, takes up more than half of the information I had in that. And I don't know how many pages are here. There's 56 pages of information that I have here, and over half of it was on Project Blue Book. So yeah, don't judge me. That was a lot of copy paste read, but I hope it was informative, give you a little better look into what Project Blue Book is. Like, I had a base. It seems like with most things that I do the podcast on, I have a base knowledge of. I have a general overview of what it is. But as far as like how in depth everything is involved with it, no, I don't. I'm not super knowing of. I'm not very well informed on the actual in-depth details, which is why I enjoy doing these podcasts, because I get to learn a little bit more about it, and hopefully you get to learn some more as well. But yeah, that's Project Blue Book right there. That is, it sounds like, I mean, the fact that I know it's unidentified flying objects. UFO does not mean extraterrestrial, does not mean an alien is up there flying it or even remotely flying it. It just means it's something that it's not identified. But when you have large groups of people seeing the same unidentified things, and the fact that in that amount of time, there are still 701 items that were unidentified, leaves you to want to believe in something more. I mean, how can we, as vast and giant as our universe is, how do we not believe there's more life out there? There's life beyond Earth, which, even if there isn't right now, I think at some point soon, the way we're wrecking the Earth, there's definitely going to be some extraterrestrial life, even if it is Homo sapiens just living on another planet. But yeah, that is Project Blue Book. I'm informed. I hope you're informed. I don't really have any closing thoughts on or anything. It's interesting to know that the government was that involved with UFO research. Unfortunately, having people at the helm who were more skeptics than believers, or even if it wasn't just somewhere in between there, I would prefer that over somebody that's just a skeptic all the way through, saying this is not this, and the fact that there wasn't as much science involved with it as there easily could have been with as much funding as the government gave to Project Blue Book. But what are your thoughts? What's have you watched Project Blue Book, the show? Do you like it? Do you not like it? I haven't watched it. I've heard that they've switched some names around, and I don't know. It's not completely. It's the History Channel. Ain't aliens. But I'll have to look into it more and check it out. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it. I'm glad to have it done. Like I said, when I started this, it was just something about this one. It was not sticking with me. It was not one that I had I had more of an urge to sit down and do it to get it done with than I did to actually oh, I'm enjoying this. I'm excited to do this episode. This was more I enjoyed everything up to this episode. It's weird. I don't know how to explain it. Everything up to this episode was I was way into and I was excited to do. And then I got to Blue Book, and this one is just, I think there may have just been a lot of information, because I've got, I think right now about 2 hours worth of stuff, which it'll go down once I cut it, but I am going to split it into 2 different episodes just because there is so much information here. All that said, thank you for listening. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you would like to follow any of the social media, I do it all. I do the video, I do the editing, I do the research. Let's see, what am I at? I think it's, you can find all of my social medias on linktr.ee/DOTU podcasts. That's Linktree, basically. That's when you see where it's got, you click on it and everybody's social medias pop up, but it's linktr.ee/DOTU podcast. You'll be able to find the YouTube, the Venmo, You'll be able to find the YouTube, the Vimeo, the TikTok, the Instagram, everywhere you can listen to it. There's I think I'm on 10 to 15 different podcasting sites. DOTU on Anchor, which is Anchor's what I do this through, as you heard in the ad, because there's always an ad for it. Instagram, Twitter. But yeah, Patreon's a thing. If you want to support me through Patreon, I would appreciate that. I love doing this. I would love to be able to do this more. There's a few items I do want to make the podcast even better. One of those would be a new camera. But yeah, that'll come with funding and everything else. So please, if you feel like donating, check out Patreon. You can also donate directly on anchor.fm/DOTU podcasts or DOTU. You can get to it. Yeah, you can reach me on, if you feel like donating directly, don't want to do the monthly subscription thing, so you can do Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or you can do directly at anchor.fm/DOTU. Has the option to do a donation if you want to do a one-time donation. Anything you do is appreciated. It all goes back to making the podcast better. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. The biggest thing is if you tell a friend, you like this podcast, you checked it out for the first time, you're like, hey, I like this. I think I know somebody else that might like this. Let them know. Let them know this is out there. Let them know that this podcast is an ongoing podcast that is researching cryptids, conspiracies, cults, and the paranormal, and all things strange. But yeah, that is it for Project Blue Book. So keep an eye to the sky, and remember that even just because they say it's mass hysteria or you're a psychopathological person, there are still 701 unidentified objects out there. See you in 2 weeks.